sans plus de transition, je me tourne à Chris. Chris, à toi de jouer.
Thank you. Do I stand? I can speak from here, can I? Oh, I want to stand. I'm nervous. It's better for me to stand. Good afternoon, everyone. I need to stand and lean on here, so otherwise I'll fall over. Sorry. It's bad enough coming this afternoon after lunch, but it's even worse coming after that, I tell you. It was suggested by Stephen that I should say a few words relating to Edward because he couldn't be here. And he sent an invitation, he sent an email in response to an invitation from the committee, so it was suggested I should read it, and I'll just read part of it because I think it's useful. Because I agree with a huge amount of what Philippe has said, but I'm going to focus it more in terms of drama. It says, thanks for this invitation. I see from the sessions you describe that there is an emphasis on using theatre to facilitate various ends. These ends are a valuable use of theatre, but they use it as a means to other things and not as itself an end. There is a distinction between theatre and drama. I think that the state of modern utilitarian civilization depends on understanding the distinction. If you were to use drama for a purpose other than its own, drama would overwhelm that purpose. Human beings are often inhuman, whether through conviction, carelessness, or ignorance. Drama's purpose is to create humanness in human beings, so that humans can create their own being. We are the dramatic species. We cannot be human unless we integrate by dramatizing it our own complex relation with ourselves, each other, and the objective world. Drama is being turned into theatre to be another product on the market. We can think of drama as the nostalgia to be human. I don't know which one to talk in. No. I'll stick with this one. I think what Edward is talking about when he talks about the difference between drama and theatre is that there is a great deal of theatre, ironically, without any drama in it. And he's talking about the difference between drama as event, in which we create our own values, and theatre effect, which can be empty aesthetics, or theatre or drama being used in an instrumental end to teach something, rather than being used for its power to enable us to create ourselves, our humanity, our humanness. Because we are the dramatic species, and we need that in order to create our humanness. I think in terms of one of the areas I want to talk about in terms of culture particularly is the notion of story. Because a culture's story is a plot which binds people together, and it gives meaning to life, and it's the source of judgment because it isn't reason that makes us human, it's the imagination. As Edward once said to me, a child who never told stories would be a human sham. If it didn't imagine, it couldn't reason, because stories structure our minds. And in fact, we are our story, we wear it, and it connects our mind with society, it relates us to the world. And in reality, culture defines what makes us human. I think today, we have a crisis of culture because although I live in a very multicultural city, we talk about intercultural relations, actually I believe that we live in a monoculture. It's one story that's predominating, it's the story of the market. It's the story of economy. And as was just said, increasingly we live in a society that knows the price of everything and the value of nothing, as I think Oscar Wilde once said. I don't want drama to serve the market. The work that I work for in my company, the TIE company, is clearly looking to try and address that through our story. Because we are in a situation now that the work that I have been able to experience for the last 30 years, work based through a TIE movement that was once flourishing through a national association called SCIPT, through the influence of Heathcote, Bolton, David Davis, Jerome Brunner, Vygotsky, and now latterly Edward Bond, is almost non-existent. And that's because the story that we were building was an alternative story that authority did not want to sustain. And for a reason that then the quality of the art form, which is a discrete art form, has been slowly eroded and is disappearing. And today, theatre and education itself as a discrete art form has now become subsumed into almost what is now this amorphous title called applied theatre, which now, from a practitioner's point of view, increasingly exists largely for the benefit of academia. But that's another story, I suppose. But I define TAE as struggling to produce theatre at the highest quality as an artistic tool for learning. And I agree with Gavin Bolton when he says art is pedagogical precisely because it brings about a change in meaning. And for the work that we do, it's not that there's a message, there's not an aim at the end of it, you don't have to get the right answer, but what there is an opportunity, a space, a gap, to create our humanness, to study the human condition and behaviour in order that it can be integrated into the mind. And in do so, to quote Jeff Gillan, real understanding is a process of coming to understand. We cannot give something our understanding. Real understanding is felt. Or as Walter Benjamin once said, we are talking about thinking feelingly or feeling thinkingly. That, I believe, is the function of drama in society. And that is, I believe, the function of my company. Big Brum actually is just a public space. And what it provides is an opportunity for children to challenge us and our culture. And that's because perhaps there's something more important than developing cognitive skills. Perhaps we can help even the youngest child, at 3 and 4 years old that we work with, to embark on a search for wisdom, the development of the child's own values and a philosophy of life. And as practitioners in our company, we proceed from the notion that children aren't undeveloped adults, but human beings in their own right, with specific experiences that go right to the heart of being human. And so, to use Brunner's term, we believe our work is about leaving the student with a sense of the unfinished business of man's evolution. There's not enough space for that anymore in our educational system, and certainly within the context that we work in. Because what we're trying to do is make the audience creatively participative so that they engage in an act of self-creation. And that's been at the heart of the collaboration with Edward Bond. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Recently, we were doing a production of The Broken Bowl, which was Bond's 8th play for the company, and it was with 9-year-old children. And in it, a girl is dealing with a father as the world is literally crumbling outside the home. The father's response is to shut the door, bar the windows, and insist that the family continues to live as a family and to continue to deal with reality in that way, even though the child knows that reality is disintegrating. And he tells her that she is using her imagination in a corrupt way. What she's done is she's created an imaginary friend to explain what's going on out there. And he tells her that she shouldn't play games with reality, because reality doesn't like it. It bites back hard. And as the story goes on, she continues to meet the hunger of her imagination by feeding this fictive person. And the father can't cope with that until, in the end, he steals the food from the imaginary person. And in the crisis moment of the play, the child takes the food from her father. She throws the spoon down, she tramples it in the earth, and she says, if he can't eat, meaning her imaginary friend, no one can. And at that point, when she did that, the last time I saw her play, a child at the front of the audience just suddenly stood up and said, at last, someone's taking charge. And of course, we went on to explore that moment with him, and we were asking about, well, what's going on here? This bowl, it's been broken. Why can't he deal with that? And he says, I don't know, but he damn well needs to. And he said, because if he doesn't, if he can't put a bowl back together in the house, how can you deal with the world out there? And that's the wisdom of a 9-year-old. And really taking on that sense of really, it's a reality that the child is able to face dramatically, but actually when he talks about someone taking charge, he's talking about himself taking charge. And what he was able to do through the imagination was take charge of that situation. And we need it. We need it for all the reasons that Philippe has said. You know, I have absolutely no doubt that the Britain I live in is in a much worse state than it was under Thatcher. And I never thought I'd say that. I really didn't. And because our narrative has been taken over, we're being told that we're all in this together. And it's a lie. We're not. What we have been done is we are being forced into positions that I never thought were possible, whereby the whole concept of my relationship to others is seen through a bargaining negotiation. Now we have the concept of the deserving poor, the deserving asylum seeker. Now we've got the deserving sick. And this is the reality that we're facing, and we need drama to deal with that. And I think where Bond's work has helped develop our work is because he returns to the Greeks. Because Greek drama emerged from a political struggle which saw the citizens suddenly topple Athenian aristocracy and assume control over government, over the polis, where there'd been no previous model. This had never existed before. And what they had to do was they had to deal with all the conscious and the unconscious questions and doubts which arose when you're given power, and of addressing themselves and all the consequent demands of that. So everything lay in the hands of the citizen. And how do you deal with that? Well, the answer they came up with was tragedy. Tragedy was part of the tradition of political thought that emerged in a fledgling democracy. And we all know the limitations of that democracy because it was built on slavery. And that's when philosophy took over. Aristotle said, slaves are only cattle. But drama, for a period, really, really, really flourished in order for us to create our humanness on stage and recognise the reality of the streets in ourselves, and the audience is there to make choices for themselves. Now, of course, our work today is much more complex, our society is more complex, our postmodern experience is more fractured, but the uncertainty and the instability of democracy still remains. And capitalism today, it seems to me, have turned everything that is both known and unknown into a commodity. And that's the basis of the monoculture, and that's the monoculture story. Now, the logic of the marketplace needs to be transcended, and we have to deal with what is an all-consuming, conscious and unconscious use of ideology and all its consequent demands. And Bond's drama, I think, is seeking to address the crisis that confronts our humanity so that we can create ourselves in extreme situations. And I think that's been his major contribution to drama and to young people in my eyes, and therefore to the development of theatre and education, but drama and theatre education. It's a form of drama that won't allow us to sit back. It won't allow us to just deny ourselves. It aims to draw aside that ideological curtain and prevent us from seeing the world as it is. It's a new form of drama that's fundamental, I think, to the contribution to our survival as a species, because that is what we're facing. Big Brum has provided Edward, I think, with a home. Ironically, he's well performed in France, but he's an exile in his own country. And that says a lot. And the plays that he's written for Big Brum, all 9 of them, they are part of a cycle with the Paris plays, what he calls the Paris plays, many of which have been put on at the Teatro de Colline here in Paris. But his extraordinary plays, it's interesting, have been performed all over the world, but in doing so, how often they are performed for adults, and that's because he doesn't patronise young people. He doesn't write down to them. He always says, I have to write up to young people. They're too searching, they're too demanding. They won't go to sleep on the job. Not if we really allow them to see the extreme of our situation. So we use this form of drama in all our work in an attempt to reach out to 3-year-olds, into our international work in family centres with people of all ages, so that we can integrate developing practices and partnerships, because what we realise is our public place needs to be shared and developed as a community of practice. It's critical. At the moment, the company is touring a story called The Giant's Embrace for 3 to 5-year-olds. And in that story, they are enrolled as storytellers. And the story finishes at the point at which Tom, who was captured by the giant, who is about to eat him, makes a pact with the giant and says, "Please do not eat me, sir, for I am thin and bony. But if you spare my life, tomorrow I will bring you a tastier morsel." And he offers his mother and his baby brother as a trade. And then the storytellers are left with the responsibility of filling that meaning and completing that story for themselves. And that is because what they need is to dramatize their experience and ask themselves a new question about what it is to be human, even at the age of 3, because as we know, young children are the world's most natural philosophers. What's the first question you get asked by a child? Is why? 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 Go to bed. Why? Just do it. Why? Because I said so. Why? It's only as we get older that we stop asking, isn't it? And so, I think that what we really need to think about is engaging in that imaginative phase of ourselves in order to seek reason, not separating ourselves, because the consequences of separating the reason from imagination are barbaric. That's the history of the 20th century. That's the history of the gas chambers. But the imagination is the source of human value. And I think that Bond's concept of the logic of the imagination is crucial to drama and theatre educators today, and I think we need to understand it much more than I do, and much more than I could honestly pretend to at this stage. It's fertile ground because it's on the site of the human self in connection with society, in that extraordinary meeting place. Because the characters and the site of an audience as the imagination is an extremely fertile ground that is both political, social, historical, and human, and they resonate with all of our experience in society. To quote Bond, humanness isn't innate in us because it's always related to the situation. So we have to create the situation. And I think that really is something that we're in danger of losing sight of, and I'm saying that for myself as well as we in this desperate situation of wanting to succeed and survive in the face of the market, in the face of that narrative. But what I'm saying is I think we need to stop. We need to stop and we need to stop and reject that narrative and create a dramatic space for us to enact our experience as human beings. I don't know what sort of utopias I was asked, and I've always said I'm very uncomfortable because of what happened to Thomas More. And I didn't think much of him anyway. But I understand the spirit in which Philippe is speaking about utopia, and I concur with it, absolutely. And it seems to me that, for me, my concern is very much now, the immediate crisis we're living in. Because one of the successes of capitalism is the ability to put culture on the market that really turns it into anti-culture. Everything, including human life, is now a commodity. It's there to be bought and sold. And whether it's the price of oil in Iraq, or a celebrity lifestyle, or even the X Factor, what we have to do is we have to reject those values, not celebrate those values. We need to begin to look at how culture can deal with that problem through dramatisation. Culture has to give us the answers to these questions. What does it mean to be human? What is the human purpose? What purpose will we create? What society do we want to live in and be part of? I had a very interesting experience of last week, having to go through the torture of our new education reforms that are put forward by Michael Gove. Those of you from England will know exactly what I'm talking about. At the same time as they're telling us there's no better time to be British, you know, we've beaten the Australians at rugby. We're going to sort them out in the test series next week. We've even now got a good tennis player, so he's no longer Scottish, he's British. That's their narrative, but at the same time the reforms that they're dealing with are driving away the basic entitlement to education. And if we deny it, we're kidding ourselves. We're allowing their narrative to take over. That's what their drive to academies and free schools are. It's a 19th century model. Everything that people fought and died for generations is being taken away. And what we're being told is that this is an education revolution that's critical for Britain's prosperity and the decades to come. That's what Cameron said. But the reality is, of course, they can't even afford their own initiatives. And what they'll have to do is start to privatise the whole of the entitlement that I've been talking about very soon. And the likelihood is, however, that our future prosperity is decades away, if that, because Europe